Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. I'm Diane King Hall alongside Tom White in our Chicago studio. Time now for our cash tag segment. For that, let's bring in our next guest, and that is Landon Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio, taking a look at Amazon ahead of its quarterly results today. And I wonder if this is going to be another one of those that's a tale of two tech giants. That's what we got today with Microsoft and Meta. Landon, you got a lot of data on how Amazon looks. It's been one of the ones that's like the lag 7 this year. What does your data show at a high level?
You know, what's crazy about Amazon is I think most of the story is not about, what normal people think of Amazon, right? I mean, Amazon.com, you go to shop. We've got that at, I think, plus 1% on a year-over-year basis. They're doing great. They're the world leader. I mean, they've got, I think, 42% margins. So it's an unbelievable business, but that's not where the story is. The story is in cloud compute and AWS. And where is that? How's that battle shaping up, especially between them and Microsoft? I think, obviously you got to include Google, but the fear is that Amazon's huge lead in AWS is eroding, and maybe Microsoft can pass them. And I think that's the big fear for Amazon investors, or the big hope for Microsoft investors. And you can see in this chart here, there is, this is the year over year. I want to make that very clear. This is not total demand. This is how the change is happening on a year over year basis. And so, if a company had a straight line in the positive, they're growing very steadily over time. So we're charting the derivative here. But when you look at, that Azure line, that purple line, that's jumping off the charts. That is a big number, plus 67% on a year-over-year basis. Whereas, AWS is chugging along at plus 13% and doing well, and Google's kind of hanging in there. But that's the story: is are they losing to Microsoft? They have, there's a big contingency of different companies that they love AWS or they love Microsoft, and we're kind of shaking that out. But they're racing. I mean, they are spending a ton of money. I think $200 billion in 2026 capex to build things out. They've done what they always do when it comes to big expenses, and they've created the business themselves. I mean, that started with AWS. They were paying a lot of money for servers and all of that. So they said, we'll build it ourselves. Maybe it can be a business. And now it's one of the biggest. They did it for delivery. They're doing it for our GPUs and AI software and Trainium and Bedrock. And so, they are continuing to build out what they see as their biggest expenses and turning those into revenue, which is an unbelievable strategy. And it's why they're one of the largest companies in the world. So, hats off to them. But again, the story is, are they losing out to Microsoft? The data that we show is that this is probably a big catch-up quarter for Microsoft. AWS is definitely going to be in the lead still, but I think the lead is shrinking significantly. So there is a concern there. And then, when we look at what happened with Meta's report, they beat on revenue, and CapEx was raised a little bit, I think $10 billion on the bottom end, and that one sold off. So if Amazon comes out and says we're going to spend even more on CapEx if they raise that, how will the street react? Me personally, I think I see it as an investment, and so any negative reaction to that kind of increased spend is an opportunity. In my mind, I think it's a wrong read. These are not companies that are likely to go bankrupt because they're spending too much. That's the risk just isn't there. They have so much revenue coming in, they can figure it out. But they're basically buying future revenue with current expenses, and I think that's a fantastic model. So, the way we see it right now, again, the retail's kind of hanging in there, plus 1%. I know that Prime Day was very successful. I think it was up 9% on a year-over-year basis. But it's almost like that's a footnote now for the company. All eyes are on compute and AWS. And for us, that's got them at plus 13% on demand. Now I want one more caveat. I talked about the derivative angle. One more caveat for that number is that's people talking, going to those websites and looking to sign up. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that Amazon's increase is going to be 13%. We think it's probably going to be higher than that, because this doesn't really account for existing customers expanding what they got. That's very difficult for LikeFolio to track. People don't, the business managers don't usually get on social media and talk about how they're increasing their spend. But we can track new customers. So I think that, Microsoft is doing really well on new customers. AWS, Amazon is doing well with existing customers and having them grow. They're both growing very quickly with existing customers. But I think that Microsoft's cutting into the lead. That could be a little bit poorly received by investors, I think.
Yeah, Landon, it's funny, we used to talk about Amazon on the retail side, but that makes up a bulk of their revenue. But as far as their operating profit, AWS is nearly 60%, even though they only generate about 20% of their revenue from AWS. But when you look at the growth rates at Google Alphabet, 82% growth rate as far as their cloud computing side of their business. Azure, 43%, both above expectations here. They're expecting about 31% growth rate as far as AWS. If that number comes in above expectations, does that change, your thinking? Because, the amount of compute that everybody's talking about they need, Amazon already has it. They're the biggest player within cloud at this point. So would that be a surprise to you guys to see, growth rates above 31%?
It would not surprise me. I think a lot of investors underestimate just how important AI compute is going to be over the next year and then beyond. We use it incredibly. The amount of AI that we use to build out our data sets and analyze things is unbelievable, and it's growing significantly on a week-over-week basis. Forget quarter-over-quarter. I can only imagine at large companies how much it's growing, and we have some context just anecdotally we talk to, and people are going all in on this because the results are so incredible. So that taints my view a little bit as to CapEx. Again, I think that it's a great investment. I would not be surprised at plus 31% or more. And I think that would hopefully, from the investor perspective, hopefully alleviate some of the fears that they're spending too much money when they start to see some of those returns come back. Because again, they are building the GPUs, they're building the software that helps these companies take advantage of AI. And it's like a triple win. You get on AWS, you're paying for those services, you're paying for the software side of it with Bedrock, you're paying for the hardware side of it with Trainium, and you're just forking over money to Amazon, but your company's doing much, much better because of it. I think that as that becomes more and more apparent, and hopefully with a print above, like you said, above 31% growth on AWS, I think investors are going to be relieved and say, you know what, this could be something really big. I think that it is something big. I think that's where I'm at. I don't care if they come in at 25 or 31. I know the direction that everything is heading. The pie is growing so much. There's room for Microsoft to grow very quickly, and AWS to also, do extremely well. So that's my personal opinion. The LikeFolio data is bullish. We're at a plus 31 on the earnings score. We think that they're going to do well on this. Everything that we've got says retail's hanging in there. AWS is growing, but there's going to be a lot of people reading between the lines on CapEx and how fast are you growing. I think it's probably going to be an overread no matter what. I think that a year from now, we're going to look back and think, look at AWS's size now versus what it is in a year. It's going to be a big, big difference. So I think a growth is coming.
Landon, real quick, there was a view coming into this year that Amazon was the member of the Mag 7 where we would see opportunity and more, investor appetite, and a lot of that hung on AWS. When you look at that chart, now I know you gave the caveat that it is year over year and not necessarily capturing all like what total market share looks like, but it looks like when you look at that chart that Microsoft is lapping Amazon. Is that what you think is partly what's holding? I mean, I don't even know if I could say that that's what's holding Amazon back, because up until today for Microsoft, it was just, things were pretty bearish for Microsoft. But what do you think has been holding it back this year?
Yeah, I think that's a big concern. I think it's a limited view, and I think it's an incorrect view in that people may assume that if Microsoft wins, Amazon loses, and this is not a zero-sum game with compute. I mean, this compute pie is going to grow exponentially over the next several years. And so even if even if Microsoft takes the lead, Amazon can be extremely profitable and have an incredible opportunities to grow their business. So, I'm not scared. As I am an Amazon investor, and I'm not scared if Microsoft, takes number one spot from them. I hope they don't, but I want everyone to be growing because I know that's the key. We don't want to see, Google falling off and Microsoft falling off and Amazon winning, because that makes you question, is the pie growing? I know the pie is growing, but I want investors to understand that, and I think that's what's going to give people more confidence going into the future. The other caveat that I think that is worth a footnote is that they own 15 or 20% of Anthropic, which is probably the best model out there right now. That's going to IPO maybe $1 trillion or more. So you got 150, $200 billion in paper gains or value coming in on Amazon as well. So I think the wins are just going to keep coming for Amazon, but in the short term, investors could misread some of this, and there could be opportunity. If CapEx goes up, if Microsoft does, shows that they're doing better than AWS, and they sell off a little bit, I'm seeing it as an opportunity.
All right, thank you, Landon. That's Landon Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio, with the latest data on Amazon ahead of its results. All right, Tom.